You know what's really infuriating? The way people make you feel like a terrible person just for wanting a little bit of security and class. Like, sorry for having standards, right? My name is Eliza, and I'm 26. Honestly, I thought I had my life mapped out until everything fell apart over something as small as an engagement ring. But I need to tell you the whole story because I'm tired of people not understanding my side. I'd been with Ethan for almost 2 years. We met at a friend's art show in Seattle, and he seemed different from the other guys I dated. He was an architect, so he had a stable job with a decent salary, but he also had this whole artistic side to him. He was a metalsmith and jeweler as a hobby. At first, I thought it was cute, like a guy playing the guitar. He'd show me little rings and bracelets he'd made, and I'd say, "Oh, that's nice, honey," while secretly thinking they looked pretty amateur compared to real jewelry. But he seemed so proud, so I supported it. The thing about Ethan was he always tried so hard to impress everyone. He had a past as a bit of a player, so he was always overcompensating, trying to prove he was this changed, devoted guy. It was sweet, but sometimes it felt more like a performance than a genuine connection. When we started talking about marriage, I was thrilled. I'd been dropping hints for months, showing him pictures on my phone of classic princess-cut rings with white gold settings. I had a clear vision, nothing crazy expensive, but something substantial. Something I could wear proudly and not feel embarrassed about when my friends asked to see it. Was that so wrong? Ethan seemed to be listening. He'd been acting secretive and nervous, and I was getting so excited. I spent hours on Pinterest, imagining our wedding, already starting to look at dresses just for fun. His family seemed to really like me, too. His dad lived overseas and worked with precious metals, and Ethan would always talk about how talented his dad was. I thought it was cool and maybe a good resource for us to get a beautiful ring. Looking back, I missed the warning signs. The way Ethan's expression would fall when I'd gush over someone else's ring, or how he'd change the subject when I suggested we go ring shopping together. I just thought he wanted to surprise me. The weeks leading up to the proposal were a blur of excitement. Ethan was working late a lot and came home with small scratches on his hands, which he just dismissed as work stuff. My friends were all asking if I thought it was going to happen soon, and I was just trying to play it cool, but inside I was practically vibrating with anticipation. I imagined the moment, the phone call to my mom, the Facebook post, the flood of happy comments. The moment finally arrived at a small get-together at my place with my family. He was so nervous, barely eating, checking his pocket every few minutes. When he finally got down on one knee, I felt my heart stop. My mom started crying, and my sister, Sarah, grabbed my dad's arm, whispering, "Oh my God, it's happening." He opened the ring box, and honestly, my first reaction was relief that this moment was finally real. Then I saw the ring. It wasn't what I'd been expecting, but it was unique. The design was an intricate winding vine pattern with what looked like small sapphires on the sides and a beautiful, classic-sized diamond in the center. When he told everyone he'd made it himself, the room erupted. My dad was asking all these questions about the metalwork. My mom was going on about how romantic and thoughtful it was. Sarah was taking pictures from every angle. Everyone was so impressed. And I have to admit, I felt incredibly special. The rest of the night was like a fairy tale. I couldn't stop looking down at my hand. It felt surreal and exciting and overwhelming all at once. Ethan was so proud and happy, and seeing him that way made me happy too. I fell asleep that night, spinning the ring around my finger, hardly believing it was real. Tomorrow, I'd start showing it off to my friends. I was finally engaged. The next morning, I woke up still buzzing. I immediately looked at my hand to make sure it hadn't been a dream. The ring caught the morning light, and I spent a few minutes just admiring it. Ethan was making breakfast, humming to himself, clearly still on a high. He kept coming over to kiss me and look at the ring like he couldn't quite believe it either. But as I looked closer in the daylight, I started noticing things I hadn't seen the night before. Little imperfections in the metalwork. tiny scratches on the band that looked like they happened during the process. The settings holding the stones didn't look quite as secure as what you'd see in a professional piece. Don't get me wrong, it was still beautiful, but these little details started to bother me. I found myself mentally comparing it to other engagement rings I'd seen, rings that had a perfect, flawless finish. This one was obviously handmade, and while that was supposed to be romantic, it also meant it looked homemade. When Ethan brought me coffee in bed, I started asking questions. How long have you worked on it? Where did he get the diamond? He lit up talking about it, explaining all the technical details he'd researched. He'd worked on it for 3 months, coordinating with his dad to source the sapphires. It was incredibly thoughtful. Then I started asking the practical questions. Was the diamond certified? How much did it all cost? Ethan seemed a little surprised by these questions. He got this slightly defensive tone as he explained it was a lab-created diamond, not a natural one, but that they're chemically identical. He said the total cost for the materials was about $1,200. Inside, I was doing the math. $1,200 for an engagement ring. My friend Sarah's boyfriend had spent over $8,000. It's not about the money itself, I told myself, it's about what the money represents. When you're making a commitment for life, shouldn't that commitment be reflected in what you're willing to invest? I started thinking about practical things, too. What if something happened to it? Could it be repaired? How do you even insure something without an official appraisal? The more I thought about it, the more I was convinced my concerns were valid. This wasn't about being materialistic, it was about making a smart investment in our future. An engagement ring is supposed to be something you can pass down, something that appreciates in value. What Ethan had made, while sweet, was basically worthless from a financial standpoint. I spent the whole day figuring out how to have this conversation. I wanted to be gentle but honest. I waited until after dinner when we were relaxed. I brought up the ring casually, saying how much I loved the design. Then I eased into my concerns about the practical aspects, the lab-created diamond, the lack of professional certification, the durability of the handmade setting. Ethan's whole demeanor changed. He got this defensive look and started interrupting me, arguing that lab diamonds are the same as natural ones. He went on and on about ethical sourcing and environmental impact, completely missing my point. I tried to explain that it wasn't about the science, it was about the investment, the value, the fact that this was supposed to last forever. But he just kept getting more and more defensive, as if I was attacking his love for me instead of trying to have a mature conversation about our future. The conversation quickly got heated. I brought up other times I'd felt like he didn't quite understand what was important to me, like the thoughtful but inexpensive gifts for my birthday instead of the designer purse I'd hinted at for months. It felt like a pattern. He got quiet and said he needed to think. I knew he was upset, but I felt I had been reasonable. If we were going to get married, we had to be able to talk about money and priorities. The next few days were tense. Ethan was distant and hurt. He stopped talking about wedding plans and barely looked at me. I kept waiting for him to come around, to realize I was just trying to look out for us. Instead, he pulled away even more. Finally, I told him directly that I would prefer we exchange the ring for something with a natural diamond, from an actual jeweler, with proper certification. He just stared at me. His expression changed, not to anger, but to a deeper kind of disappointment. When he finally spoke, his voice was different, colder. He said, "Fine." Then he held out his hand for the ring. No discussion. No compromise. He took it and walked out. I was in shock. I thought he was just being moody and would come around. But the next day, he called me with this final, cold tone in his voice. He said he'd been thinking, and he decided I wasn't worth marrying. Those were his exact words. I was devastated. How did we go from being engaged to him calling me worthless over one conversation about a ring? I tried to call back, to text, to explain, but he never answered. It was like I had been erased from his life overnight. The almost 2 years we'd spent together, all our plans, all our love, none of it seemed to matter. The weeks that followed were awful. I kept expecting him to come to his senses, but he never did. He just moved on with his life. It hurt more than I can admit. Then, about a year after the breakup, I started seeing things on social media that made my stomach drop. Ethan had a new girlfriend, and she was all about his jewelry. She was constantly posting photos of pieces he'd made for her, talking about how talented and artistic he was, and promoting his work to her friends. His hobby had turned into a business. He had a brand, a website, and was selling pieces for thousands of dollars. The work was professional, polished, and expensive. He was making custom engagement rings that were going for $5,000, $6,000, even $8,000. But the real kick in the gut came when I saw their engagement announcement. He had proposed with another handmade ring, but this one was completely different from mine. It had a massive, natural diamond and flawless craftsmanship. Even I had to admit it was stunning, exactly the kind of ring I'd always dreamed of having. The caption talked about how he designed it specifically for her, using only the finest materials. The ring had clearly cost a fortune. I stared at those photos for way too long, feeling this mix of anger and regret. This was what Ethan was capable of. This was the level of investment he was willing to make, just not for me. He had the talent and the drive. He just needed someone who believed in him and helped him reach his potential. Instead, I'd focused on what his work wasn't, not what it could become. I'd rejected his handmade ring because I wanted something more valuable, more impressive. And now he was making exactly those kinds of rings, just not for me. You know what? I still don't think I was wrong to have standards. It wasn't unreasonable to want a commitment to be reflected in an investment. The problem wasn't what I wanted. It was Ethan's inability to handle honest feedback and his decision to throw away our relationship instead of working together to find a solution. Maybe if he'd been more mature, if he'd listened to my concerns instead of getting defensive, we could have figured something out. But he chose to walk away from someone who loved him over what should have been a minor disagreement. I've moved on now. I'm dating someone new, and honestly, I'm probably better off without someone who would abandon our relationship so easily. But sometimes I wonder what would have happened if things had gone differently. I guess some people would rather start over with someone new than put in the effort to solve problems with the person they're supposed to love.